This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. Thousands of orphaned children fight for survival each day on the streets of Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. The majority of these children are below age 12. There are not many orphanages in Mongolia, so these children form gangs and sleep beneath the city streets to stay warm. The purpose of Brian Hunter's expedition is to raise awareness of their plight and distribute necessities to over 3,000 of these homeless children while delivering a message of hope and love. To do this, he ran 1,500 miles west to east across Mongolia from July to September of 2013. You can learn more about his expedition at acrossmongolia.com. Brian Hunter, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hello.
Brian, how did this situation in Mongolia get to be where it is today?
Well, we have our friends, the communists, to thank for that. Mongolia was under the kind of the Soviet wing of protection, if you will, for a long time, over 70 years. When communism collapsed, the fallout, the ripple effects went all the way through the Soviet bloc nations, including the country of Mongolia that was heavily subsidized by Russia. When the Soviets pulled out, it threw the country into a tailspin, financially, politically, economically, socially, and the unfortunate collateral damage of the pullout of communism was the children within the capital city. Many families, because of hardship, had to disband their families. Their families basically just broke up. People went their separate directions because they weren't able to stay together as a family because they couldn't feed or clothe or house an entire family. So many parents abandoned their children on the streets, hoping that they would survive somehow. As a result, there are thousands of children that lived on the streets in the capital city of Mongolia. Mongolia is the coldest capital city on the planet. And so when wintertime would come, these children and other homeless people were forced to retreat beneath the city streets in manholes and in sewers to try to escape the super cold temperatures. I was there in April on a recon trip, and in April, we think of springtime and flowers and, puppies and all those fun things. But Mongolia in April is still freezing. I could never get warm, and I was there in April. And so I can't imagine these children living even just one winter on the streets. This problem was really bad up until about 3 years ago, and the world began to show a spotlight on this situation. The people of Mongolia felt embarrassed and compelled to do something, which I don't fault them for neglecting their children because they're just trying to keep the power on and keep the country held together. So when about 3 years ago, this issue kind of came on the global stage, and the country of Mongolia decided to fix the problem by simply welding shut the manholes. That was their solution. So it really turned into a shell game because they could say, well, there are no more kids in manholes, which is true, but where did the kids go? And so when I discovered these children, I knew that for years they had been living in manholes, but now that the manholes were sealed up, where were these children? What was the current situation, and was there still a big need? I found that there was still a tremendous need. These children have been shuffled around. They may not be living in the manholes and in sewers, but now they have gone to one of several places. They've either been picked up for little petty crimes and are rotting away in jail as children. They have been shipped off to the countryside to work in mines, gold mines, copper mines, things like that, which you can imagine how those conditions are. Some of them have been put into state-run orphanages. Think Oliver Twist. Pretty bad conditions there as well. The others have they've just disappeared, and they have been smuggled across the border into other countries for human trafficking, which is awful. The lucky ones get to survive out at the city dump. And so that's where I found most of the children that we went over there to work with and to help was actually at the city dump.
So, Brian, how did you discover this problem?
Well, when I was first looking into the possibility of running across Mongolia, I was doing some research. Is it possible? Is it permissible? Is it feasible to even run across the country? And I quickly discovered the plight of these children, and that's what really moved my heart, is just running across the country or doing some extraordinary feat. It has intrinsic value just of its own for the sake of adventure or exploration, but it doesn't really do much to benefit mankind. And I personally believe that as a citizen of this planet, I have a responsibility to leave the place in better shape than when I got here, and helping these children is one way that I can do that. So that's really how I found these children.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background in running? Do you have a lot of experience in ultra running?
Oh, that's funny. No, I do not. I grew up in Colorado and Wyoming. And in Colorado and Wyoming, it's very easy to stay active. I'm a rock climber, mountain biker, skier, tromping all over the mountains. I was never much for running until I moved down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I went to school at Oral Roberts University. While here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the roads are pretty dangerous. If you're from Oklahoma, if you're from the area, you know that the roads aren't very conducive to cycling, and the traffic doesn't have a very good eye for cyclists. So that was pretty dangerous. So I thought, well, maybe I'd pick up running. So I'd only been running for about 2 years before we started planning this expedition.
Talk to me a little about the planning and tell me a little more about the recon trip.
Well, once I did some preliminary research on the internet, and, all signs pointed towards go. And when I discovered the plight of these children, I thought, well, now I have to do something. And we began to look into all of the logistics, because my family came with me as support crew. So it wasn't just me running across the country. It was my whole family of 4. My wife, Lissa, my 5th grade daughter named Selah, and my 3rd grade son named Kai. So, it was going to be a big circus getting across the country. And the key is to work smarter and not harder. So I was able to find a fixer, an expert in logistics. And working with him, he was the one that secured vehicles, drivers, cook, food, our route, fuel, all of those sort of details that would be very hard for me to plan here in the States.
Brian, was it just you and your family that were traveling across Mongolia, or did you have others with you?
It was the 4 of us, plus intermittently 1 medical person. And at the last minute, there was a camera crew that came with us. So all in all, it was quite a motley crew. We had our fixer Tolga, my family of 4, a medic, a cook, that's 6 right there, 2 cameramen, that's 8, and then 3 drivers, that's 11 of us tromping across the country.
On your website, it says the toughest part of the expedition was feeding everybody.
It was a challenge, but it was great because it was a challenge that I did not have to worry about. Yeah. Our fixer and our cook worked through all of those details. But you need to completely banish any preconceived notion you have about towns, roads, grocery stores, restaurants. We just have no idea. Our Western mind has no idea what those really were like. Roads were more like two-track trails that traverse the country here and there, like a big bowl of spaghetti going everywhere. Towns were hardly towns. Settlements, basically. I mean, just picture Star Wars going into Mos Eisley, just rough and frontier and primitive. That's kind of what the towns were like. So they would secure food in the towns. But we learned early on in the trip, do not ask what the meat is.
Why?
Because you didn't want to know. We thought that it would be, normal. Like we were expecting lamb, we were expecting beef, we were expecting goat. What we were not expecting was camel and horse, which ended up being most of what we ate.
Was it smooth sailing once you landed in Ulaanbaatar before you got to the western part of the country, or how much prep went on once you landed?
Once we landed, I got to meet our fixer, Tolga. We had many Skype meetings leading up to the trip. We met up with our medic, who was also from Oklahoma, and we did a little bit of planning. We had to register with the national consulate because you can stay for under 30 days without a visa. If you stay longer than 30 days, which we were going to, you needed to register with the consulate. And then if you were going to stay longer than 90, you needed a visa, but we were kind of in that window. So we just had to register. So we had to jump through a few political hoops. By the time we landed in Ulaanbaatar, our fixer Tolga had already sent the vehicles to the western border, because we spent a day or so in the capital city, and then we took another flight all the way out to the western capital. So we didn't get to meet our drivers until we landed in Ulgi, the far western border town.
Describe that town to me.
Oh, man. The contrast of America to Ulaanbaatar all the way out to Ulgi is just mind-blowing. So in Ulaanbaatar, everything is different. It's a modern city, and it's an advanced city. So big buildings, lots of traffic, people hustling and bustling, people dressed pretty Western. But the first thing that you notice is you're completely helpless if you cannot read or speak Mongolian. I've done a lot of traveling to different countries in Europe and Central and South America, and my Spanish is barely okay, but at least I can recognize letters and words look similar. Mongolia, it's a completely different alphabet. And so you don't know if you're walking into a restaurant or an auto parts store. You're always continually reminded that this is a very foreign place. And then when we went to Ulgi, the plane lands and it comes to a stop right on the tarmac, and they pull out this little ladder, kind of rickety makeshift thing, and they dump all of our bags just in a pile right outside the plane with the prop still running. And you grab your bags quick because the pilot is already throttling up to take off down the runway again to make another run or head back to the capital city of UB. And you grab your bags, and people are just kind of grabbing their stuff, and hopefully you grab all your stuff, and the plane takes off, and then you're just left out on this tarmac, almost in the middle of nowhere, surrounded in the far distance by low mountains. You feel very remote right when you land in Ulgi.
What's the town itself like?
The town itself is, again, something like a Star Wars movie. It's the largest town on the western frontier, and very few of the roads were paved. In fact, only 10% of the roads in all of Mongolia are paved. And so the town is dusty, it's drab, there's very little vegetation. We had just missed a storm cycle that had come through, And so there are these huge puddles just right in the middle of the town that people were walking through or splashing through, almost like miniature lakes, just right in the middle of the market and the streets and the little roads. And so navigating around the water was different, and the smells were totally different. Livestock and animals and raw meat, and it's like something that you would imagine seeing in a Star Wars movie.
So from this point, you begin your run. Tell me a little about that. I mean, like, for example, how many miles were you running a day? Were you starting off slowly with the intention of doing more miles as you went along? How did that work?
That's exactly my strategy. Once we landed in Ulaanbaatar, we were still about 100 kilometers from the actual western border. So we had to drive a good ways to the western border, and then we needed to get permission to actually go to the Russian border. And that was fairly tense, but everything worked out smooth there. I started the run, and the goal was to gradually increase my mileage. So I didn't start day one running 30 miles a day, which was my average that I needed to make. So it took me about 2 weeks to work up to that 30-mile-a-day average.
Tell me about your typical daily routine.
The day usually started with my alarm going off at about 5:45 in the morning, and it would take me 15 minutes just to stand up. And it sounds odd, but I was so incredibly sore and so exhausted every day that it took a lot of work just to get started. So now we're camping, and so I've been sleeping on the ground in a tent in my sleeping bag with my whole family, and I've got to, unzip my sleeping bag, and many mornings it was really cool, and so you have to put on some layers before you even get out of your sleeping bag. And I always said, if I can stand up today, I can walk, and if I can walk, I can run. So picture the Tin Man without his can of oil, and that's about what I looked like every morning as I got up. So I'd get up, I'd get dressed in some layers, and then I'd go over to our meeting tent, and our cook would have a good breakfast for us, some sort of rice or noodles or like chicken soup kind of breakfast, and I would drink maybe 1.5 liters or so of water, as much as I could, maybe try to choke down a protein shake or something, and then I would head out on the road I had a camelback vest that I would drink out of, and some food and some layers in there. And I would head out on the road, and the rest of the team would start packing up camp. And by the time they packed up camp, they would meet me anywhere between miles 7 and 10. And I'd try to take a break at 5-mile intervals. So they'd meet me at mile 10, and I'd grab a snack and some water and get back out there, adjust my layers if I needed to. They'd meet me at mile 15 or 16, and I would eat lunch. I'd have a hot lunch that was prepared by our cook that morning, and then put in a thermos or something, and drink some more water. And then my wife would let me take a 20-minute nap. So she would walk me over to the side of the little dirt road and wrap me up in a emergency space blanket, and I would just crash out dead to the world for 20 minutes. Best 20 minutes of my day. And she would come and wake me up, and I would start it all over again. If I can stand up, I can walk. If I can walk, I can run. And with a kiss on my cheek, she would send me off on the road again, and we'd meet at mile 20, at mile 25, and then they would go ahead to set up camp. So then I would run into camp, I would eat and drink some more, and then collapse in the tent at night, only to do it all over again later.
And you were running 6 days a week?
I would run 6 days a week and then rest every 7th day.
So tell me about the conditions that you're running in. What's the temperature like throughout the day? Are you dealing with bugs? What's happening out there?
Oh, well, the weather was, for the most part, just delightful. Just imagine in a mild, relatively low humidity climate during the summer. The latitude of Mongolia is about the same as the US Canada border, so long hours of daylight, relatively low humidity, mild temperatures. And so when I say mild, it would be maybe, oh, 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning. So you'd want to wear, a hat, maybe some gloves in the morning while you're kind of getting things going. And then it could warm up to 90 degrees during the day, which felt really hot, but it wasn't that bad. And then it would cool off again in the evening. As we got into September, though, the weather really started to change, and we got out of there just in time. We never got snowed on, but probably the last 2 weeks of running, it got below 30 degrees in our tent at night, so very chilly in the morning.
Brian, did you get into any rain?
For such an arid country of Mongolia, we actually did get ourselves into quite a rainy season. There was one period where it rained. Listen to this, Paul. It literally rained continuously for over 9 days, nonstop. Now, I know that in some countries with a monsoon weather pattern, it'll rain for long, long periods, but during the monsoon season, people are indoors or they're not out in the rain, but we were completely exposed to the elements 24 hours a day, and I was running almost 12 hours a day, and so those 9 days were probably the most miserable of the trip, because if it ever did stop raining, it was either really cold or the mosquitoes would come up again, and I'd get chewed on by mosquitoes and rained on some more, and I'd get into the tent at night and I would peel off all my wet clothes, and I couldn't hang them up in the tent because they would never get dry because it never really got warm enough. So I would have to stuff these sopping wet clothes into my sleeping bag at night to try to dry them out. And the next morning they wouldn't be soaked, but they would just be damp. And so I'd put on these wet, damp layers and grumble lots of bad words under my breath and climb out of the tent and eat my breakfast and get out on the road. And within 5 minutes, I'd be soaked to the bone again and just stay wet all day long. And so that was pretty miserable. But again, you just run through it and make the best of it. And you know that it can't rain forever. And there were some really, really beautiful rainbows. So it worked out.
Was the landscape fairly flat?
For the most part, yes, it was flat. There were large rolling hills, low mountains that I had to cross. I probably ran over, all totaled, maybe 6 or 8 different full-on mountain range passes as I crossed one mountain range down into the flats and then up into another mountain range. There are probably about 8 high mountain passes, that you would see like in Montana or something. But the terrain was also really varied. There were certain sections that were completely just moonscape, barren, flat, not a single thing growing for hundreds of square miles. And then we would run into this beautiful grass steppe land that was just like just beautiful grasslands. So it was very varied, but incredibly gorgeous.
How is your support crew holding up into this point and along the way?
My wife was, to be honest, my wife is the real hero of this trip. She was absolutely phenomenal because not only did she have to worry about herself out there camping more than 72 days, but she also had 2 small children and me, the big baby. Oh, I'm tired, and oh, my feet hurt, and oh, I'm hungry, and oh, I'm dehydrated. So As support crew, my wife was phenomenal. My children were great. They loved it every day. They just got to play outside and run around. And the country is very safe as far as people or animals go. And so they had, a trip of their life. My medical support, he was able to come out for like the first 10 days, and we were really lucky that he was bored because we didn't have any big significant issues that he needed to jump in on.
Now, Brian, along the way, you're visiting villages, schools, churches to deliver, I guess I could say, supplies to these places. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like? Tell me about that.
We were, early on in the trip, we were in the western region of Mongolia that's kind of dominated by the ethnically diverse people called Cossacks, and they live a traditional nomadic herding lifestyle. And what they did was they would travel with the seasons. They would pack up their gear, which is like a Mongolian equivalent of like a Native American teepee, and they would set up in these beautiful mountains in the summertime. And our expedition kind of ran through their valley, and we stopped to take a break and just meet them and visit with them. And my son Kai and my daughter Selah ended up running off with one of their daughters, who's about the same age as Selah. And we saw them about 45 minutes later, almost a mile away on this hillside, herding these goats down the mountainside. And they herded the goats back down to this little Gare family, and the mom and some of the other extended family members tied them up, and the mom started milking, and we just got to be a part of this Mongolian family for a day. And it was just one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had, because they just made us feel right at home. And I felt like I really got to get a glimpse of what it was like to live a traditional Mongolian lifestyle in the countryside. We did not distribute any supplies to them. Most of the relief work that we did happened later on in the trip as we got back into the capital city. But that was just a great experience with these traditional Mongolian natives.
How did the Mongolian people react to you during this adventure?
They were, they were shocked. They just had disbelief. They have a phrase that sounds like this: "Hush," and that means, "Oh my gosh," or "Hey," or "Get out of here." It's kind of an all-purpose utility word, "Hush." And so I would tell them through sign language and drawing little maps on the ground, I'm running from the western border to the eastern border of Mongolia, all on foot. And they would just shake their head and go, "Whoosh." And they would try to give me a ride on their horse or their camel or on their motorcycle or in their car, whatever kind of transportation they had. They didn't want to see me running the whole way across the country. So they tried to help me out by giving me a ride. And when I explained to them through sign language and maps that I had to run, and I would pat my feet, I had to run across the country, gosh, they would just shake their heads, and I would run off, and I could almost time it. 10, 9, 8, 4, 3, 2, 1, and here comes the laughter. As soon as I would walk away or run away, they would just start laughing like, "This guy is crazy."
So, Brian, in the end, what turned out to be the biggest challenge?
Well, I would say the biggest challenge was just starting every single day. People ask, did it get easier? No. The running never got easier. And I just said, if I can stand up, I can walk. If I can walk, I can run. And my family was a tremendous source of strength for me. The vision and the reason why we were doing this was a tremendous source of strength and motivation for me. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people that didn't believe in us, that didn't believe we could do it, that didn't believe that we were doing it for a noble cause. And really, all of those people that doubted us was a great source of strength for me. I turned their doubt into fuel that got me down the road, because I've never called them to say nan nanny boo boo, but reaching the finish line was nan nanny boo boo enough for the whole world.
In hindsight, what's one thing you would have done different?
Oh, that's a great question. My first answer is nothing. Logistics were well planned out. The route was well planned out. The team was wonderful. What we did for the kids was amazing. We raised over $20,000 for orphaned and vulnerable children living in the capital city that went to different organizations that are working directly with these kids. I guess my second answer would be, now having reached the finish line and surviving, I wonder if I could have pushed myself harder and done, 40 or more miles a day. I won't know that until I go back to break my own record, which I do not intend on doing. I'll let somebody else do that.
Brian, tell me about the orphanage you were working with.
Okay. When we got back to the capital city, there were really two organizations that we partnered with that are all of the hard-earned money that people had raised went to. One of the organizations was a small private-run orphanage. There are about 28 kids there, ranging, from toddlers all the way up to maybe about 14 years old. And this orphanage, we had gotten in touch with before we went to Mongolia, and we decided to partner with them. And we were able to pay for the installation cost of a new heating system, because last winter their heating system had gone out. We were able to pay for a new cook stove for them to be able to feed more children. We were able to pay for the installation of new playground equipment in the back of the orphanage and a fresh load of sand to kind of cover all the dirt and rocks and rubble that their little backyard playground is on. The other organization that we partnered with was a gentleman by the name of Baska. And Baska was raised in the city dump. He managed to find a life out of the dump, and now he's devoted his life to reaching and loving on children and families that are still living in the dump. Now, this is what's crazy, Paul. If you or anybody listening to this podcast has ever been to like your local dump or landfill, you can kind of get a picture of what it's like. The landfill is full of garbage, things that people no longer want, discarded, junk, trash, stuff that you just want out of sight, out of mind, to forget about. You dump it at the landfill, and then you move on with your life. Well, this is where people live, and this is where many of these children live. There are over 500 people that lived at this one dump, many of them elementary children. And so we partnered with Baska because he has a feeding program that's set up right on the edge of the dump. And so he cooks meals and loves and provides kind of like a refuge for these children to come to. And so we provided a meal one day, and we were also able to give Baska enough money so that he could buy his own little piece of property right at the edge of the dump and set up a ger and begin his very own feeding program for these children, because he was using borrowed land and borrowed facilities to feed these children. So we were able to give him his own property and help him set up his own feeding program. And that was such a huge, tremendous reward for us to be able to see firsthand, practically meeting the needs of these children in Mongolia.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was great.
What can people do if they want to help the children of Mongolia?
Oh, that's great. I really hope that people would hear this podcast and read about what we're doing and be inspired in two different ways. It would just be a home run for me if people found out about this story and it inspired them to step out and try to grab a hold of their dream that's been in their heart. Once you stop listening to those voices telling you that you can't do it and you actually start doing and living your dream, there's really nothing that can get in your way. And so I hope that people would be inspired to try to grab a hold of their dream. The second thing that would be a home run for me is if people were moved with compassion and wanted to specifically help these children. They can go to our website, acrossmongolia.com, and make a donation there. We're partnering with organizations that these funds will go directly to the children in Mongolia. We also have another website called Strong to the Finish, and that is put together by the production company that sent 2 cameramen with us, and they're making a feature-length documentary film about our adventures. And so people can support that or keep their eye on that for updates. That movie should be rolling out sometime in the next 16 or 20 months.
Brian, what's next for you?
Well, hopefully not any more running anytime soon. As I mentioned before, I was not a runner starting this, and running 57 consecutive marathons is enough. And so whatever is next, I hope it doesn't include much more running. But I have started my own nonprofit organization called Strong to the Finish, and we may do future initiatives similar to the Across Mongolia expedition. Maybe it'll be in a different country. Maybe it'll be for a different group of people or some other brothers and sisters on this planet. Currently, I'm staying very busy with speaking engagements. And so anybody listening to this podcast, if they're interested in having me come and share my stories about Mongolia or the lessons that I learned while there, you can reach out to me and we can get something booked. But right now my calendar is got lots of dates on it, traveling and speaking about Mongolia and sharing the stories of our great adventure over there.
What's the best way for people to contact you?
If they are listening to this podcast, I'm sure somewhere right around there, perhaps on your blog or on your website, there is a link that people can click on, and they can go to our website, acrossmongolia.com, and I believe there's a contact button at the top. They'll send an email to info@acrossmongolia.com, and that will come right to my email inbox. And so I can answer those emails or further questions directly.
Okay, Brian Hunter, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and congratulations on your accomplishment.
Oh, man, thank you so much. I never get tired of hearing people say thank you, not because it feeds my ego, but because when you say thank you, in some ways I hear these children of Mongolia saying thank you. And so it really was a great adventure, and it really was my pleasure. I'm the one that needs to be telling Mongolia thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this amazing experience. But thank you so much, Paul.
You're welcome. Recorded November 14, 2013. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.